Okay, let's dig into this. Imagine, just for a second, you get flagged. Not by a person, no, but by an algorithm.
Hmm.
And then based on that flag, based purely on code, you're facing consequences. Maybe even, getting arrested.
Sounds pretty out there, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Like something from a movie.
Totally. You think, oh, that's years away. But what if this kind of machine-driven governance, what if it's actually starting, like right now?
Well, it's a fascinating thought, this idea that the logic, the sort of impartial logic of algorithms, could be the bedrock of future legal systems.
Yeah.
The material we've looked at, it really pushes against how we normally think,
Yeah.
suggesting, a shift where law isn't just interpreted by people, but actually is code that runs itself.
Exactly. And that's what this deep dive is all about, this emerging idea of an AI Supreme Court.
Hmm.
We're going to explore this potential shift towards justice basically run by machines, how it might happen, what it could mean.
And the ideas we're discussing, they come from various sources, articles, notes,
Mm-hmm.
pieces that sort of paint a picture together.
Right. Our mission really is just to try and get a handle on this possible future where algorithms could be the final arbiters.
Okay. But I think to really grasp it, we need to start with why. Why even consider such a huge change?
Good point.
And if you look at our current justice systems, the human ones, well, the sources highlight some pretty big challenges, right?
Oh, absolutely. The numbers alone are kind of staggering. Over 40 million people in prison globally. That's huge.
It is. And think about how long cases take. Years, sometimes.
Yeah, and let's be real. Often the money you have seems to matter more than the actual facts.
That's a key point in the material. So many civil cases just get settled because people can't afford to keep fighting.
Not because it's necessarily just, it's just cheaper to stop.
Right. And that makes you ask, how just is a system really when things like someone's wealth or a judge's bias or their emotions?
Or even just being tired. Or politics.
Exactly. All these human things can sway the outcome. They're just part of the deal with human systems. So the idea of a system potentially free from that inconsistency,
Yeah.
well, it's definitely appealing.
It really is. And that's where the AI potential starts looking, well, interesting. Imagine it. A system that just runs 24/7, never gets tired, remembers every single precedent perfectly,
Applies the rules the same way to everyone. Can't be bribed.
delivers judgments quickly, and, crucially, it learns and gets better over time with more data.
The term the sources use is autonomous justice. I think that captures it well. This idea of a self-governing legal system.
Yeah.
And the point that its first forms might not look like our courts today. That's important too.
Right. The source even sort of hints that something like X365 could be an early version, makes you think outside the traditional courthouse box.
What's X365 again, just for context?
Yeah, the sources mention it quite a bit. It seems to be some kind of platform or project focused on building decentralized digital communities
Well,
with their own sort of internal rules and maybe even economies.
got it.
Yeah.
Okay. Because if we look at what's happening already, especially online, the beginnings of this autonomous law are kind of visible.
Like smart contracts.
Exactly. On blockchains. Code that automatically enforces an agreement. That's basic legal automation right there.
And it's not just contracts, is it? You've got DAOs, decentralized autonomous organizations.
Right. Using coded voting systems for governing themselves. Like tiny digital democracies run on code.
And even the idea of using, like, tokens as incentives instead of taxes, that's a pretty radical rethinking of how society could work.
You're also seeing things like community courts, Claros is mentioned,
Huh?
and even AI bots handling customer service disputes. Small steps maybe, but they're steps towards machine mediation.
But the sources talk about a next phase that sounds, well, revolutionary.
Right.
AI judges trained on huge legal databases.
Voice-based hearings using advanced AI language models. Think about that.
Enforcement happening automatically through code, through smart protocols.
And using neutral machine logic to sort out disputes, taking human bias out of the loop as much as possible.
Plus this idea of real-time sentencing based on, like, data models for rehabilitation, moving beyond just punishment.
But maybe the biggest idea, the most game-changing one, is this possibility of a universal legal layer.
Yeah, explain that a bit more.
Well, imagine a system not tied to one country or religion or government.
Okay.
A single, consistent set of rules for justice that works everywhere online, maybe even offline too.
Wow. That leads to a pretty fundamental question then. What even is law if you don't have a state in the traditional sense?
Exactly. Think about these growing spaces, metaverses, decentralized online communities, AI workforces that aren't tied to any border.
Right. In those places, how do you enforce agreements, protect ideas, settle fights?
And the source material gives a pretty direct answer.
Hmm.
You use machines, mediating machines, enforcing machines instead of human go-betweens.
So the future Supreme Court, it might not even be a building full of people.
It could be, as one source suggests, an open-source large language model.
An AI.
An AI core. Yeah, constantly learning, making decisions based on rules agreed upon by the community, maybe even audited by the community.
So justice becomes less of a top-down thing and more like a protocol, like TCP/IP for the internet, but for rules.
Kind of. And ethics. Ethics becomes something you can potentially tune, like a parameter in the machine,
Right.
which is, well, it's a powerful idea.
Powerful and maybe a little unnerving. Makes you really think about how we define our values if we're going to code them.
For sure. And that brings us to, well, what about your role in this, the listener's role?
Yeah.
And specifically, platforms like this X365 thing the sources keep mentioning.
How do they fit in? How might they be building this future?
Well, the implication is that projects like X365 are maybe laying the groundwork, building the digital infrastructure.
Okay, like what kind of infrastructure?
Things like token systems that track how people behave in the community. Reputation scores showing trustworthiness.
AI watching over forums.
Yeah, proof of attention mechanisms maybe.
Yeah.
Voting based on how much you contribute, that kind of thing. Karma systems.
So these aren't just features of a platform. They're like proto-legal tools.
You could see them that way. They're setting norms, making agreements work, promoting fairness online, basically paving the way for these bigger autonomous systems.
And the source makes this really strong claim that AI Supreme Court isn't separate from the economy. It is the economy.
Explain that.
Well, the idea is that the rules, the algorithms governing our digital lives, will increasingly decide everything. How much you earn,
Sure.
what you get access to, who trusts you, and how justice is served within that system.
Which means digital assets, like these X365 tokens perhaps, could become really influential. They might be the currency of access, trust, and even justice itself.
It sounds like it all comes down to this mix of money, computing power, and community working together.
Exactly. Capital, computing, community. When they align under clear, evolving rules, maybe you don't need the old-style rulers as much.
But okay, let's step back. There's an ethical side to this, right? The sources touch on it. Justice without compassion versus compassion without rules.
Yeah, that tension. Purely logical justice, no empathy. That could be really harsh, really unfair in practice.
Totally rigid.
But then compassion without any structure, that's chaos. No consistency.
So where does AI fit?
Well, the intriguing idea presented is that AI might offer a third path. Compassionate precision.
Compassionate precision.
Okay, the potential to have scalable fairness. Applying rules consistently, but maybe also being able to factor in individual situations in a way that's hard for human systems to do, especially at scale in our super connected world.
But it's crucial to say we're not there yet. This future isn't here now.
Not at all. But the foundations, the ideas, the early designs, they're emerging. We see them starting to form.
And what's really relevant for everyone listening, especially if you are involved in something like the X365 community the sources mentioned,
Is that you might be closer to this than you think.
how so?
Well, think about it. Every time you say refer someone on a platform, or vote in an online poll, or just interact with an algorithm that tailors your feed,
You're participating in these early systems.
you're kind of contributing to how these proto-legal frameworks evolve. You're part of the experiment, in a way.
So this whole discussion, it's not just theory. It's about watching the start of potentially massive change in how we think about law and justice.
Absolutely. This isn't the end of the story.
Yeah.
Far from it.
Yeah. In many ways, it feels like it's really just the beginning of the future of justice.